This is the AI Advantage podcast, where we explore how AI is shaping professional services. Frank Lazaro has a rule. If a 7,000 people engineering firm saves just 12 minutes per employee per day using AI, that is 70,000 hours a year back. For a firm that bills by the hour, that is not just a productivity gain, that is a business model shift. Frank wrote the book on AI for AEC firms, and 4 of them, and he went inside one of the biggest AEC firms to put that into practice. Today, we'll figure out what actually happens when his theory meets a large organization. Mm-hmm. Welcome, Frank, to the AI Advantage.
Yeah, Baker, appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Maybe you could just introduce yourself, talk about your background, and also talk about Terracon.
Yeah, sounds good. My background, for the most part, I started off in technology and product development. So go way back. I started working for the phone company. And then you fast forward a couple of decades, a lot of my career in places that I've worked in and outside of industry, particularly AEC industry, has really revolved around go-to-market, product strategy, just getting products to consumers or buyers. About 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and right in the middle of COVID, I was working for a small marketing agency, and they got hit pretty hard. So I started looking for another opportunity, and I met an owner of a small AE firm here in Atlanta, about a 130-person firm. We started talking. He was looking for someone to manage his client services, his sales, his marketing aspects, and I made the shift into this industry. And halfway through that, I realized, wait a minute. I was I need to start incorporating my technology, my background. So we started using AI very early on how do I get a small marketing department, 2 people, 3 people, to operate 6 people. Somewhere in there, I realized there's got to be other firms that would be interested in this. And so I created a presentation. I started pitching it to these associations, and I got on the speaking circuit. And lo and behold, you start talking about it, and people are like, do you do consulting? And then I kind of went on my own, and I started doing consulting for about 3 years to all size firms, large firms, small firms, et cetera. And along that way, I ended up doing an opportunity with Terracon, actually mid last year, focused on one of their software solutions, a product that they bought, and went back and gave them some recommendations. And then we continued that conversation about me actually delivering on one of those recommendations, was becoming more that product strategist for them. That conversation leaned into January of this year. I found myself 2 days in Kansas talking with some of their senior leaders, and it ended up being a great fit. So I kind of made the shift from an independent consultant into actually working for one of the largest AE firms in the country, really helping them understand their product strategy of, we have these software solutions. Do we sell them internally through our own projects? Do we sell them externally, right? Think about it, becoming a software provider for the industry. And so that's my charge. The thing that I'm really tackled with is going out to sit there and say, where do these products fit within our larger product strategy, right? How do we become a software provider in this space? And then start thinking forward to, does AI incorporate into this? How do we think about pricing strategies? How do we think about go-to-market? All the things that would go into something that is not a very traditional AEC activity, which is, how do we sell SaaS? How do we sell data? How do we sell this in a marketplace when that's not our traditional posture, where we're so used to selling services?
Awesome. That's great. Let's talk about the products that you have, and then we'll talk about AI and how AI is going to add tremendous value to all the users. Maybe you can talk about Compass Stage 1, other products that you're managing, and then what do they do, and what kind of value does it currently deliver to your users? And then and how are you thinking about AI from different users' point of view, and what value it's going to add?
Yeah. So one of the things you'll learn about Terracon, and I think most big firms have this, but we have what we call project life cycle. And there's really 4 steps in that cycle. So there's the site selection part. So think about pre-construction, site selection, those things. The second phase is really the design and mitigation phase, right? So after you selected your site, You start getting into design, you start what are the mitigating factors to create the building, the structure, or whatever we're doing. The third phase is really the construct phase, right? Actually building those pieces. And then the fourth phase is really the asset management. So when you think about, or you look at all the products that Terracon has today, they fit somewhere within that circle in one of those four places. So if you think about Pivot or Stage 1, that is your early due diligence stuff. So I need to find a place to build a data center. Okay, great. Pivot is a visualization tool. It's a location intelligence tool that allows you to kind of understand what is happening on each parcel. Is there environmental things that I need to take into consideration? Is there water? How close am I to power? So basically all of the things that would allow an owner to select a site that is most suitable for what they're trying to do. Pivot does it very quickly. You can look at 10 different parcels very quickly, narrow it down, find the site that makes most sense for your project, and then kind of move into the design phase.
That's great.
Compass is one of those, it's essentially Terracon's client communication cockpit or platform. Any project that is kicked off internally, we're using Compass, and owners and project owners all through that process can go there to kind of see where they are in the stage of the project, what they need to know about the project, timelines, updates, etc. The other thing too with Compass is that it also allows them to buy or get other things based on their project. So say if they're in the middle of a project and they want to run an environmental report, they can order it directly through Pivot. Or if they need something else, they want to understand, say, virtual soil profiles, they want to understand boring data, they can order that through Compass. So when you think about Compass, Compass is that underlying client cockpit that allows the client to basically interact with any of our digital services, any of our service line delivery folks. And then Pivot and Stage 1, we have other products like Pave AI, which basically gives you pavement intelligence. We also have another product called Command Center, which helps you understand concrete curing times and a bunch of other stuff. But all of that stuff really kind of emanates out of the Compass platform for Terracon clients. Some of our products, you can actually buy them and not be a Terracon client, right? In other words, we're not managing your project, we're not doing your project, but I'm another AE firm that wants to have location intelligence. I can go get a Pivot subscription and do the same things that the Terracon folks do internally.
Oh, that's great. Maybe you can take Pivot and Compass as an example, and how are you thinking about AI? Now you have a lot more capabilities that are available to your product, right? How are you thinking about AI? How are you embedding it into the product, and what kind of value are you potentially looking to deliver to the users?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one of the questions I asked when I was talking with Terracon early on about coming on board is where do these products go? So what you would think is that Terracon has basically 60 years worth of data. If you want to know what's subsurface in the majority of the lower 48, Terracon probably has boring data that kind of will help you answer those questions. So when you start thinking about AI and you start thinking about the value of AI, right, it's that data structure that sits underneath that the Terracon engine has created over the last 6 decades that we could then start applying AI to it. One of the things that when you think about that, and I made this comment the other day to someone, which I thought was pretty funny, is you start thinking about fast food and all this other stuff. Everything has protein in it, right? Protein donuts and protein coffee. In some ways, I think what you're finding is that there are some people out there that are just putting AI into things that AI does not need to belong. I don't need protein in my donut. It's a donut. I'm eating the donut for other reasons besides protein, right? When you think about applications, it's the same exact way. It's why is AI in that? And I think when you look at what Terracon and what we're trying to do is that we want to be very strategic about where AI is incorporated so that we're driving client value, that we're driving product value, we're driving shareholder value. We're not adding AI just to add for the sake of adding AI to sit there and say, oh, Terracon has AI in their product. That's not what we're trying to do. So we're very strategic about that. That strategy is really going to revolve around the fact of how do we take all of our knowledge that we have around the things that we do, the geotechnical side, the boring data, pavement, all of that, and be able to drive value to our clients. And it's not about adding an AI chatbot to Compass. It's not about adding an AI layer to Pivot, but it's almost like, how do we incorporate AI to where it helps to reduce risk and increase value to our clients? So when we think about that, we think about location intelligence, to think about Pivot, what would be a great way to kind of think about that? One way to do that is take all of the 500 plus data layers that we have, structure it in a way to where that we can build an AI application on top of that, to where we can provide location intelligence to any practitioner inside or outside Terracon if they wanted to know something specific about what was going on this. Are there endangered species? Help me run scenarios around, if I built on this site, what scenario or planning could I do around that? So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. How do we take that? The second piece to that is like, how could we use computer vision to help our clients get better around that? And there's some tools out there today that you see a variety of things out there. But if we could use satellite imagery and on-site imagery and LiDAR and all this other stuff to give information back to our clients to sit there and say, hey, you own 1,200 parking lots. These top 10 parking lots are the ones that need the highest priority for repair or replace. Here are the cost estimates. Here are these things. And we're basically proactively using AI to help identify those things. That's going to be driving client value. So when we think about AI internally, that's how we're thinking about it. We're not in the business of just throwing AI into something to say that we have it. We're really looking at really two things: client value, reduced risks, increasing shareholder value.
Awesome. That's great to hear. I really liked your protein example. I was at Starbucks last week and then I saw the protein coffee and I was like, really? Yeah, exactly.
I saw a commercial yesterday for protein Hot Pockets. So like a kid that doesn't need to be there. Now I understand why they're doing it, and I understand why people put the AI moniker on those things, because it sells. If it has the word AI on it, people are likely to buy it. But I think what you're finding is that people get disappointed when they get it, when it's either not true AI implementation, it's like an AI light or AI adjacent. So it is interesting is that I think those individual products and companies, they're doing themselves any justice just by slapping an AI moniker on something.
Yeah. Maybe you can take a very specific examples of where you're seeing tremendous value, and maybe you've actually created that value that you validated, and then work backwards as to how you're able to actually stitch that. Data is great, but you also have to structure it, stitch it in a way that your AI models can really create the value. And there is a lot of things that have to be right for the value to be packaged that is useful to the user. Maybe you can take one example and just take us through the process you went through around value.
Yeah. So I had one client out of the Metro DC area early last year doing some consulting with them. And it was interesting is that their approach to it was they weren't focused on creation, which I thought was an amazing place to start. I'm like, oh my God, they're not worried about creating a proposal. They're not worried about doing something. Their whole thing was around knowledge, right? So they were a 1,600 person firm nationwide. They generate a lot of content. Their biggest challenge was when I'm pursuing something new, right? How do I find all the supporting information and like projects and all of these things around that? And so when they hired me, it was like come in and help them with the strategy. They did have a small in-house dev team, and they were basically just using an enterprise version of ChatGPT. So they're building the front end, that they were doing some other things. So the value was, okay, so what is the use case? What are you really trying to do? And it was really came down to access of information. And what you found is that as we worked through that process and that project of basically in helping them to enable more of this AI type of search mentality and indexing, what we found is that the creation part was just a natural extension to what they were trying to do. So we started off trying to solve one problem, and we ended up really trying to solve multiple problems to where it's like, oh, now that I have this, now that I can create. The biggest challenges that we had with that is that how do you get the AI to operate in a way that it's actually pulling back all the information that you would want, right? So it wasn't going out and finding anything outside of their ecosystem, which was good. But what we found is the thing that actually made that work really well is that their internal dev team put a real heavy focus on structured data, right? So you captured this data. And it wasn't even just structured in the sense of keeping it in the same location. It was file nomenclature, how we name things, where they're stored. A project closeout became a very big deal because how you close the project out and where those documents were stored became more important versus just randomly having stuff in Teams, randomly having stuff in SharePoint, randomly having stuff on your desktop. It really became important around not only just structured data, but then you started coming into how do you create a culture of AI innovation in the sense of closeout's not optional anymore, right? It's like you have to follow very specific steps. So there was a training component.
Has to do it, right, across the board.
Exactly. So it wasn't just closing out the project the way we normally would close it out. It's you close it out, documents are stored in a particular spot, they're named a particular way. So it became more of a cultural thing. We think that we solve things with technology, but just like with cybersecurity, our biggest flaw in this whole process is the human. So training the human to do the things and keeping them in the loop and then having the process and doing those things really ended up setting them up for success.
Awesome. Like maybe you can take a metric or a value metric that you said, look, they saved this much time or cost savings or whatever, they're able to do more work, efficiency, effectiveness, any of those. So maybe just talk through how big of an impact we're talking about.
Yeah, so when you think about go back to that one example, they were probably saving on average of about 20 to 30% of their time because to be able to find information faster, they're not wasting days, they're wasting minutes and hours. So one of the things that I did when I've had that conversation numerous times with whether they're CEOs or even just marketing managers, right? We pivoted quickly from we need to learn how to use these tools and select tools to, okay, now what's my ROI? And so I came up with this concept and I ended up writing a book on it. It's like finding 12 minutes. And the reason I wrote the book and the reason I created presentations and the reason I did that was continually getting conversations or questions about if I invest this, I don't know what I get out of it. So I'm like, okay, so how do AEC leaders think about things? They think about things about heads and hours, right? It's like I structure my whole business around hours. So if you can create an ROI to sit there and say, hey, listen, if you can save an hour, you gain an hour on the billable side, that's a thing that they can relate to. So I came up with a simple formula. And the reason I picked 12 minutes, by the way, was because when I'm presenting on stage, I want people to be able to do the math in their head. 12 minutes times 5 days equals 60. 60 minutes equals an hour, right? If I said save 17 minutes, people are going to be pulling out their phones, doing calculations. They're not going to be able to do the calculation quick.
That's smart.
But if you focus in on the 12 minutes, and the 12 minutes is a very easy hurdle to get to, you can save 1 hour per person per week. Now you turn around and you sit there and say, oh, what does that equate to from an ROI perspective? The ROI then is for a 200 person firm, 1 hour per week, that's 10,000 hours per year. That's the equivalent of almost 4.5 full-time employees. So 2,080 hours per year is the number of 40 hours per week that an average person would bill. Now you have 10,000 hours that you just magically created. How much of that can you capture and turn into billable work? Say you capture only 10% of that. Okay, great. Now multiply that times your average billable rate, 1,000 hours per year times $150. Now you can see where the ROI comes in. So when you mystify that and say 12 minutes per person per day per week, that is not a daunting thing anymore. That's a very easy thing to accomplish, right? When you think about it, you sit there and say, if you were in 3 meetings per day and you used an AI note taker and that AI note taker saved you 5 minutes per meeting, you're already at 15 minutes per day, right? The math gets very quickly. Now apply that to a proposal. If it takes you 40 people hours to do a proposal, so you have 4 people putting 10 hours into a proposal, and you can save 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, that 40 hours now becomes 20 hours. Can those 20 hours become billable? In some ways, yes, because you're pulling billable people off of billable work to write technical narratives for your proposal. If you could do it in 20 hours, maybe you could do 2 proposals per month versus 1 proposal per month. Your pipeline and your backlog starts to be built. So now it becomes real dollars. Now I'm connected to hours. I'm connected to my pipeline. I can start connecting it to backlog, right? So if I can increase the number of proposals I could do per year, great. I can decrease the number of hours billable people are spending on non-billable things. I'm generating revenue there. I had a CEO come up to me afterwards of I did it at a conference, the CMAA conference one year. He came up to me and he says, hey, listen, based on the number of people I have with a 10% capture rate, he says, if I invested $200,000 in AI, I can generate $2.5 million in additional revenue. I need to figure out how to do that. So now we shift from I need to use AI to what is the ROI? And I've tried to bridge that gap for most leaders by using a simple equation.
Awesome. That's brilliant, by the way. People make it too complicated to articulate value. And what you've done is a very simplistic way. They can do math in their head. Now that you have this frame that is very powerful for them to think about ROI, let's say now you have this firm which is ready to save $3 million, $2.5 million, or whatever the number might be. It's still a huge hurdle to get people to use it. And again, it's a huge change management, cultural change, and a whole bunch of things that you need to go through to really get people to adopt UI, adopt AI in the firm. And you also argued that most of the firms they try to roll out without training, right? So maybe you can talk about what are the hurdles you saw, and then what are the best practices in getting AI into AE firms?
Yeah. So typically, if you start with the tool, you're starting in the wrong spot, right? I think that's where most firms struggle right off the bat. Is I think in their urgency, they went out and they gave everyone ChatGPT, or they went out and they said, "Oh, we're only going to do Copilot." So if you're starting with the tool, you're really starting in the wrong spot, in my opinion. You need to start with the problem. What are you really trying to solve for? Or more importantly, looking at your process, what part of that process actually causes the most friction or consumes the most time? And can you apply AI to it to reduce that? So I like to take it from the perspective of, say your process is 10 steps. You don't need to apply AI to all 10 steps. What you need to do is identify of those 10 steps, which one costs me the most time and gives me the most headache. And then go back and sit there and say, if I could apply AI to it, how would I solve that problem? So go back to the example of the multidisciplinary firm up in the DC area. Their biggest friction point in their whole process was access to information. I need to find other projects. I need to find information that kickstarts their proposal process. They wasted the most amount of time there. So they wanted to solve that, and they went there and they reduced that time by 30 to 40%. So start with you have to look at your process. You have to look at where those friction points are, and then figure out what the right tool is to solve that. Now, there's plenty of off-the-shelf things that can solve some of those things. Chat may be able to solve that, Copilot, Claude, but don't start with the tool. Start with where that friction point is, and then go from there. Then once you kind of change that process, then the human aspect then comes into this, and you can't ignore the fact that you need to train people on the new way to do something, right? Just because you identified the problem in the process, just because you've changed the process and you've added the tool to it, you can't automatically assume that everyone knows how to do that the most efficient way. What you'll find is that if you gave them the tool, they're going to waste more time trying to figure out what to do before they become efficient, versus if you train them up front, then when you gave them the tool, they have that jump start and more efficiency of actually getting to utilize that tool.
Yeah. So what you're saying is choose the right problem and then make sure you apply. Once you apply to the right problem, make sure you do right training to enable the folks the right way. Can you also unpack when everybody talks about AI, and not just the tools, but if you have an AI model, nobody trains AI, and that's a big issue. Can you unpack that? Like, where did you see the problem? What kind of implications did it have? And there is little to no patience on training the AI models with the right data sets. And it takes a lot of time and effort investment to get some of this precision.
Yeah.
And many firms give up or they don't have the skill set to train it. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think that goes back to the comment I've made previously about like most people should just buy versus build. I don't think that most firms understand the effort and the skill set and the time that's required to actually build and train a model, right? It's not a one and done. It is an iterative, ongoing, lifelong process,
Yeah.
right? It's never gonna end. You can always find new ways to improve it and train it, et cetera. So what you find is that a lot of firms that go into that, they underestimate the level of effort that is required to actually get it to operate in the same way. And even very large firms like Terracon, right? We have our own dev teams. We have our own data teams and we have our own AI. I have 3 separate teams that are focused on different aspects of this piece. And they are 100% overhead. They're dedicated to just improving the data and doing that. So it is a commitment and an investment for us to actually do that. And I think a lot of firms underestimate that level of what is required to actually do that. So it is one of those things to where I think some firms need to really evaluate what is needed to get that done.
That's right. Let's talk about the high stakes that you're involved with in AEC, right? It is wrong site assessment, or you miss some environmental data, or some faulty geotechnical read. The implications are huge for the AE firms, especially when you're dealing with AI. It is not precise in many different times, and it's not the same result you get depending on as you change the context a little bit. It's not predictable in many ways. So what happens when AI gets it wrong in the field where errors are legal and have physical consequences? And as a product leader, as you're thinking about putting this in the product, how are you managing that risk?
Yeah. And so it's a really good question. And it's interesting when you frame that up. It's like with AI, there's no way to 100% reduce the risk, right? It's one of those things to where that there is an opportunity for something to be inaccurate, for it to hallucinate. I think that if you are in those high stakes types of situations, right, the human in the loop on this I think that becomes more and more important through this whole process, right? So if you look at kind of what we do at Terracon too, like we have rules around how and when you're allowed to use AI. But the one key factor in all that is that there is a human in the loop aspect that we require. If you produce something, a human has to review it before it goes out the door. And so what I think what you're going to find is that AI is more and more likely not to replace the independent thinking, and that the professional becomes more and more important to the whole process, simply because, yes, I can make the professional faster, more efficient, but they need to review things and do things. So I think it's so funny. It's like we're always worried that, we're going to replace people. We're going to place this. Yeah, I think for menial jobs, and you go down, I don't need a human to go pick something to put a shipping label on it. A robot's going to do that. AI is going to do that. But I think when you get into professional services, I think it's the way the role of the professional service person, the licensed professional, just evolves, right? They were doing the creation, they do the review, they stamp it, it goes out the door. Where you're going to see with AI going forward is that professional doesn't leave that process at all. It's created the document a little bit faster. The human review still occurs, and then it goes out the door. We need to be thinking about this as less of it's creating inaccurate or hallucinating or creating artifacts or whatever it is. In terms of thinking of it as like, it makes the professional a little bit more efficient, but the professional is not diminished in that process. Matter of fact, it's probably more elevated in the process when technology and innovation and AI is incorporated.
Awesome. That's a very unique and brilliant thing about what's happening with AI in AEC. That is not true in case of many high-tech firms where you see these layoffs happening. Oracle laying off 30,000 people, and Microsoft, Google, Amazon's, and there are all these software engineers they don't need anymore, or middle management and whatnot. I think in case of...
Matter of fact, I was just to that point though. I just read an article this morning that I think was at NVIDIA was complaining that the Claude code is actually now producing more errors, right, and faults at a rate faster than it was back in February because they did an update or something. So you can see the fallibility of some of these things too. It's just like it was working and now it's not working, and now it's your engineers are now getting more involved, right? It's one of those things to where, you know, yes, it's made the programmer better, but this whole concept that we're going to be able to completely replace the programmer, I think it is misguided in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a post maybe 2-3 weeks ago where one of the VPs at Amazon, he said, hey, we laid off a whole bunch of people and we had a lot of them back because we still have a lot of, and at a higher pay because we still, it's hard to manage these agents. So we need more people than what we thought. On AEC firms, look, one of the narrative from outside is they're famously slow to adopt new technologies, right? And for valid reasons. What is different about this moment? Especially, I think this is like a generational technology that adoption is going to take time. But is AI the actual breakthrough, or is it another cycle of hype from your point of view? And how are AEC firms reacting to this new technology, and especially how you see adoption going?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I think AI, I think you're right. I think it's different in the way that it's not optional, right? I think when you think about like when BIM came out, you think about, you had a choice to whether or not you adopted it or not. I'm going to buy this software. I'm not going to buy this software. I'm going to adopt this practice or I'm not going to adopt this practice. Plain and simple. And you had a lot of choice into doing that. AI, on the other hand, I think what ended up happening is that there was really no way to gate any of that.
Yeah.
Right? There was really no way to you can't stop it. It isn't everything. It's in your laptop. There's a button on your laptop now. There's software. It's in everything in a lot of ways. Right? So it is one of those things to where I think that's what makes AI a lot different, in the sense that we didn't have a choice to do it. Now we just got to figure out how to adopt it. I think some firms are better situated than others in terms of adoption. I think that it's so funny. I'm in the final stages of writing my dissertation for my doctorate, and the whole premise of my paper is built around this concept of building an AI-ready organization from a leadership capability perspective. And the whole premise is that it's not the technology that's hindering us, it's the leadership that's hindering us. And the problem is that they don't have what they would call the dynamic managerial capacity to understand the fast adoption. And a lot of industries are like that. You can go to financial services, the construction industry, architecture, engineering, they're all in that same space. So I think there's going to be some pain as leaders try to adopt these things, because this is a very uncomfortable position to where they have to sense and reorganize and restructure their organizations to be fast adopters when they historically have been very slow adopters. And the funny thing is, it has nothing to do with not wanting to adopt the technology. They're just risk avoidant. That's right. I don't know the technology, so I'm going to wait. And it's almost, I'd rather be a fast follower or a late adopter than an early adopter. AI has flipped that on its head to where it has forced everyone to be an early adopter. And if you're waiting, you're screwing yourself as you go through the process. So I think it's a leadership issue, not a technology issue in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of leaders are either really embracing it and they're on the forefront of, yep, we're going to figure this out. And then there's other firms out there that are just like, I feel like a kite in a hurricane, don't really know don't know where to invest. So that's almost, they're trying to do wait and see, but they can't. So there's so many different things that are happening to that. So it is a very interesting time for us in terms of adoption.
Yeah. There is a lot of recent publications just in the last 2 to 3 weeks where, most of the AI projects have failed, especially the failure rate has increased over the last 6 months. But a lot of money is going in, but I think the failure has gone up. So there is that narrative and evidence that is out there. And it's not very specific to AEC, but more broad across the industry and especially in professional services. And there is the other end of the narrative where companies like PwC, where they're saying, look, at least a portion of their business is now evolving to be SaaS, where you don't have to talk to people. Everything is automated and you just buy a license and you get the service from PwC. So they have completely gone the other way, where you don't need man in the middle. It becomes a service that you can access. So you can see both sides, and obviously in early stages of technology evolution, all these things happen, right? We'll see how this pans out. Moving on to the next topic, for the previous answer, you definitely feel like it's not another cycle of hype. There is real value. Adoption still has to be cracked.
Yep. And to unpack that a little bit, I think that there's real value. I think the problem is that we were very early stage on a lot of this, and we haven't really figured out the value, right? So when you think about it, where did this start? The easiest places to go was sales and marketing, right? Create content, create social media posts, do these things. Then it's now evolved into, okay, there's really not a lot of ROI in that, right? There's not a lot of value. How do I figure that out? And now it's pivoted to, okay, how do we get this to connect to real work? And I think that's where we are today, is that I think the firms that are on the front end of this are now starting to think about, how do we do this to actually impact real work? And that, I think a lot of people really haven't figured out yet. And some firms have gotten a little bit better at it. I think other firms are still struggling. I think the fancy bells and whistles and all of the hype around, it's going to replace jobs, it's going to do this, it's going to be great, it's going to solve world hunger, I think we're sold.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think so. So I think it's one of those things to where we're now taking a step back, and we're thinking about, okay, like, where does the real value lie? And it's just not throwing AI on that. When you go back to, like, I've had conversations with a good friend of mine that works at Uninet. They did not jump into the AI thing immediately like everyone else. They were very diligent about where it goes in and how they were thinking about it. Now they have a great partnership, and they did it. Because I remember having initial conversations like, why would you put AI on an ERP? That makes no sense. What does it do? And but they had that same philosophy around, we're going to invest money in developing an application. Does it drive customer value? Does it drive shareholder value? So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for most firms to get past the hype and then really figure out, where does it really drive real value versus just slapping AI on something.
Yeah. I'm going to just touch the client relationship part. One of the narratives that is out there is all the technical skills are commoditized. You really don't need these people anymore, right? Which is the narrative. Like, accountants won't have jobs, lawyers won't have jobs, and it goes to every professional service role you have. So if they don't have jobs, okay, eventually, sometime, Elon Musk statements are more aggressive than others, but they all say something similar, that all these jobs are going away. So number one, what is your personal opinion on it? And especially in case of AEC, how do you see that thing panning out? And number two, can you talk in that context, what happens to the client relationships, how important they become, especially in the age of AI?
Yeah. I think it's a good question. I think that was one of the things that was really overhyped and really sold about, everyone's going to lose these jobs. I don't see it, particularly for professional services, right? There's one of the things that you have to recognize with AI is that it lacks the ability to infer. It lacks context and human knowledge. Those things, like that human element, it's not there. Is it ever going to be there? I don't know. But you can't take someone that has 20 years of pavement experience and knowledge and whatnot and be able to apply and infer and do a bunch of things that are on there that the AI is ever going to do. Do I think that AI is going to impact jobs? I think it has in some ways, in some jobs, right? But I think it's impacting it further downstream, and it's not really impacting professionals in a lot of ways. I think all these tech firms that have laid off all these software engineers are going to come to regret it. Do they need to staff back at the same levels? No, I don't think so. But I also think, too, that you're always going to have that human programmer in there in some ways. And I think a lot of them are starting to learn that. But if you work in customer service, there's no reason why AI can't help service a phone call, right? They could do the routing. So I think that you're going to see pockets of impacts, right? And I think you're going to see it more on things that have structured sets of data with very little variability, right?
Yeah.
Think about when you call your credit card company, think about when you call your cable company, the internet provider, right? A lot of those phone calls and stuff can actually be handled and managed through AI, in my opinion. And in some ways, they've already started to. But if your whole business is on reviewing contracts as an attorney, yeah, you're probably in trouble. If you're an attorney that goes to court, your job is probably pretty safe, right? So I think I think there's a more nuanced approach to job impacts. Circling that back down to the impacts to the AEC space, I don't see a lot. I do see opportunities for people that are heavy on the construction side. So think automation, robots, right? Think about, there's a bunch of these out there. Do I need to pay someone to do framing, or can I have a robot do the framing? Can I have a robot do the painting? Yes, right? But you're still going to need humans at some point to run those things. So I think you'll see an evolution of these jobs and not necessarily that. Architects, I don't see architects going away, but I see architects' jobs becoming easier, right?
Okay.
Reducing risk and a variety of other things. I think the impact to the customer, to the last part of what you were mentioning, the impact to the customer is better, faster, more efficient projects with less risk, right?
Yeah. Having
tools to be able to gut check the human, but not eliminating the human from the process, I think is going to be the benefit to the customer. Can I, instead of taking 12 months to build something, can I build something in 6 months? That's better, faster, cheaper, maybe. I don't know. And I don't like the words to use cheaper, but it is one of those things to where that's one of the things that I don't like about our industry is we get penalized for doing things faster. When I'm billing against an hour, I want to bill every hour that you've given me, right?
Yeah.
Can there be better incentives in the process for delivering these things faster and cheaper? So I think there's going to be an evolution on the pricing side as well for us. But I really do think that it's more efficient, less risk tolerant projects simply because we're using technology to be better, faster, smarter.
Awesome. Yeah, do you think the pricing will become eventually at some point more outcome based than hourly based?
It has to. I can't see any other way, right? Because what are we going to do? Race to the bottom on pricing? Oh, you're using AI, so therefore cut your rates? No, I'm using AI, but I've delivered your project 6 months earlier. I should be rewarded for that. So I think that when we think about speed and efficiency, our industry is going to have to rethink, but that's not just us rethinking our pricing, our customers on how they buy. So there's an evolution, I think, across the board that is going. Because I think customers are going to be like, well, you use technology, so therefore I should be paying less. And we're going to be thinking about it. I'm using technology to deliver your project faster. It is less risk, more efficient. There should be some reward mechanism in there. How that plays out, I'm not 100% sure, but that's the way it's going to have to evolve. Because if not, we're racing to the bottom and turning everything into a commodity.
Yeah, awesome. Last question. You worked with so many of these AEC firms. So a managing partner at a 300-person environmental consulting firm who is listening right now, they are trying to get into AI right now. So what would you tell them is a first step? And what are the 3 or 4 best practices you would give them?
Yeah. The first step too is you really got to take an inward view of your organization. You need to look at the processes, right? What's broken? What's inefficient? What do you want to do? What goes hand in hand with that and where your success is really going to lie, and this is where leaders really play a part, and it goes back to my dissertation I was talking about, is leaders have to set the culture. You have to have an innovation mindset within your organization and not the mindset of, we've always done it this way. If the first thing out of your mouth is, we've always done it this way, you're not going to be very innovative. It doesn't matter what technology you get, you're never going to evolve around that. So understand, like the things that you need to do is understand where your processes are, what's broken, what do you want to improve? Second part of that is that you have to have that inward view of yourself and your organization. Culturally, are we open to being an innovative company? and then focus on the technology. So if you want to focus on 3 things, those are the 3 things that are going to set up for success. The companies that are doing this well are the ones where their leaders are open to not doing the things that we need to do that we've always done, encouraging and building a culture that is wanting to adopt technology, and then focusing on problems that you're trying to solve. And then the last thing is really focus on the technology that would solve for it. It may or may not be AI, right? Goes back to, I'm buying a donut because I want the donut. I'm not buying it because of this protein.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. Frank, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. This has been a great conversation.